Well, again, remember, the problem is the debt. It's not the ceiling. In fact, the ceiling is actually part of the solution. The problem is they keep raising the ceiling every time we approach it or hit it, as opposed to doing something to stay within the ceiling. That was the whole purpose of the debt ceiling, which actually started back in 1917, coinciding with America's entry into the First World War and the fact that we were borrowing a lot of money, and so Congress wanted to put some kind of cap on how much money the government could borrow. And the problem is, we keep raising the ceiling, and so it's not really achieving its intended purpose, which was to put some limit on how much debt we could accumulate. But every time we get to the ceiling, though, we just get all this political theater where the Republicans pretend they actually want to cut spending, but they don't actually propose any significant spending cuts. And of course, the Democrats don't want to cut any spending. Nobody wants to raise taxes, at least not on the middle class, which is where all the money is. And so the debt ceiling always gets raised. This is all political posturing. This is throwing meat to your base. But at the end of the day, the politicians will come together and once again do the wrong thing and raise the debt ceiling. In contrast to what they claim, this is not about paying our bills. If we were going to pay our bills, we would pay them and not raise the debt ceiling. This is about continuing to not pay our bills. Instead of paying our bills, we borrow the money. And we can't continue to avoid paying our bills unless we raise the debt ceiling. So that's what it's about. It's not about doing the responsible thing. It's about continuing to do the reckless and irresponsible. The reason we've got $32 trillion in debt is because we keep raising the debt ceiling. Yeah. And the Democrats now, since they're the ones that want a clean raise, and the Republicans are, pretending that they want to do something. But of course, they had a chance to do something when Trump was president, and they had the House and the Senate, and they just voted to raise the debt ceiling back then, when they actually could have maybe done something, and they didn't take advantage of the opportunity. So now it's all BS that they're, claiming they want to do something now, when they know they have a president of the opposite party. This is not the time. The time to do something was 4 years ago, and they did nothing. But the Democrats are saying, hey, if we don't raise this debt ceiling, it's a disaster. Interest rates are going to rise. Everybody's going to suffer. That is what's going to happen if we do raise the debt ceiling. See, all the bad things that they say are going to happen if we don't raise it are going to happen because we have been raising it. The fact that we keep raising the ceiling guarantees a debt crisis, because the only thing that's going to put a stop to the debt is a crisis. And so we've chosen to have a crisis on the market's terms instead of trying to manage something less horrific on our own terms. Now, first of all, I don't expect any more downgrades. S&P got punished for that downgrade. I think they got targeted. I got fined. So I don't think anyone's ever going to downgrade U.S. Treasury debt again. But if there was an honest rating on it, it would be junk, because there's no way that the U.S. government is going to repay its debts in real money. Right? That's what counts. Sure, we can run the presses and give everybody a bunch of paper. But the question is, what will the money be worth when the bondholders receive it? Mm-hmm. And I think it'll be worth very little. I mean, inflation is just getting started. We have guaranteed that we're going to destroy the value of our currency because we refuse to rein in these debts. So our creditors may be paid, but it's going to be a hollow payment when there's very little they can actually buy with the money they get paid. Not really. I think our leaders have to be willing to risk their own re-elections to do the right thing, because we really have to bring the budget into balance. And that would require a cut of about 30% from the government right now, this year, and every single year going forward. Yeah. And basically, though, if you look at where interest rates are and what the interest on the national debt is likely to be at the end of next year, we really need to cut government spending by about 50% in order to balance the budget. That shows you how out of whack it is and how far we're living beyond our means. Nobody is willing to cut the budget at all, let alone by 50%. So, there is no political way out of this. It's just not going to happen. So the reality is inflation is what's going to happen. Right? The money is going to lose a lot of value. The key is going to be to prevent hyperinflation. That's going to be the key, to prevent the dollar from losing all of its value. So people are going to lose the value of government benefits. So let's say you're getting Social Security. The real value of those benefits, at a minimum, is going to be cut in half. That's reality. But the worst case would be if the value of your Social Security benefits go down by 90% or 99%, right? Mm-hmm. So they're basically worthless because the currency is completely destroyed. So that's the outcome that we have to prevent. But I don't think there's any political chance that we're going to do the right thing. I mean, what I would do personally is I would give a big haircut to everybody, including the bondholders. I would not pay the treasuries off 100% on the dollar. We'd have to restructure because everybody has to participate in the pain, including people who bought U.S. treasuries. And if that means U.S. treasuries are downgraded, well, that's what it means. It doesn't matter because the government can't pay. Because if we're going to cut Social Security, if we're going to cut Medicare, if we're going to cut government pensions, if we're going to ask middle-class Americans to take a big haircut, we have to ask wealthy investors, who own U.S. treasuries, to take a haircut too. They took a risk. They loaned money to the U.S. government. The U.S. government was clearly bankrupt. They deserve what they get. Yes, and that's what I'd like to avoid. And I would like to see Social Security benefits eliminated or cut strategically. For example, I shouldn't get any Social Security. Right? Warren Buffett shouldn't get any Social Security. Right? So there's some people that should lose 100% of their benefits. Okay, and that would make it possible for other people to retain more of their benefits. It needs to be means tested, based on assets, based on income. And I know a lot of people don't like that, but that's the reality. But I think going forward, we need to get rid of the program entirely. I mean, the government never should have gotten involved in this. It's unconstitutional. It's bad economics. It's an intergenerational Ponzi scheme. The government has no legal authority to be running it. So we need to get rid of Social Security and Medicare. I understand that, unfortunately, now you have a lot of Americans that completely depend on it, and that's unfortunate. Had it not been for government, had they not been taxed so much while they were working, they could have saved for their own retirement. But they didn't do that, and instead they've been betting on a government Ponzi scheme. And so I understand that there's going to be some people that unfortunately need to get this welfare, which is really what it is. Like, a lot of people think, well, I paid into Social Security. Nobody paid into anything. You just paid taxes, and the government spent the money. The government lied to everybody. Everybody was swindled by the government, So, people paid into Bernie Madoff. That didn't mean they were entitled to get their money back. So people who paid into Social Security are no more entitled than the people who paid into Bernie Madoff. They got conned. It's just that this time the con men were the U.S. government. But I get it. I want to try to figure out how to take care of the people who really need it. But for the future generations, we got to get rid of it completely. But, politicians don't want to talk about that. But what's going to end up happening, because we're not going to do it my way, because no politician has the guts to cut Social Security for anybody, even for Warren Buffett, right? We're going to wipe it out through inflation. And that means that the people who need Social Security are going to have the same reduction in their benefits as guys like Warren Buffett who don't need it at all. So the way it's going to end up being done is not going to be equitable at all. Everybody is going to suffer the same, whether you're a billionaire or you're barely making ends meet. I would rather it not happen that way, but unfortunately, that's the way it's going to go down. First of all, the biggest threat is that the pensions aren't even pensions. Right? It's a Ponzi. It's not a pension. If it was a pension, it would be funded. Now, some pensions are underfunded, and there's problems with those. But Social Security isn't funded at all. It's not like it's underfunded. It doesn't have any funding. Its funding is future taxpayers. Right? So it's not like there's any income that's being generated on investments that were made with money. On a normal pension, if I pay into a pension, when I retire, I'm getting my own money back, plus the income that's been earned. Through investments of my money that I've been putting in over the years. Well, when somebody gets money from Social Security, they're not getting back their own money. Their own money was spent, a long time ago. They're getting back the new money that somebody else puts in. And the only chance that new guy has of getting his money is if the government finds somebody in the future to put that money in, right? So it's a whole Ponzi scheme. But it can't work. You can look at the nature of the Ponzi. When it first started out, there were like 50 people paying taxes for every one person that was collecting a benefit. So, okay, it worked. Now it's more like 2 to 1. Pretty soon it'll be 1 to 1, right? It can't work. You can't, one person can't support himself and an entirely additional person. The numbers just don't make it. And so it's all going to be paid for by printing money, which just destroys the value of everybody's money, not just the Social Security money. When the government wipes out Social Security benefits through inflation, it wipes out everything. all dollars lose value. Doesn't matter where they are, even if they're stuffed under your mattress, right? They're all going to lose. Yeah, well, the U.S. dollar has done substantial damage to the global economy because it was the reserve. I mean, we have basically exported our inflation all around the world, and the world has suffered from this relationship. America has gained at the expense of everybody else. And, you know, it's not that everybody has suffered equally. I think the emerging markets have borne the lion's share of the burden of subsidizing American profligacy. But we basically just shot ourselves in the foot, you know, to accelerate the process by weaponizing the dollar. I think President Biden put the nail in that coffin when he put those sanctions on Russia. And so everything has now been accelerated. In the long run, this is going to be good for the United States. I mean, the sooner we lose this privilege, the quicker we can start, you know, creating a viable economy, because we were going to lose it eventually. Certainly for the rest of the world, it's better, right? The sooner they can stop subsidizing America, the better, because America's loss is going to be the world's gain. When the dollar crashes, and it will crash, that means other currencies are rising. Now, what does that mean? That means as Americans get poorer, everybody else gets richer. And so Americans consume less and everybody else consumes more. All the stuff that Americans used to buy will be too expensive for Americans to afford. But that stuff is still going to be here. The factories aren't going to start producing it just because Americans stop consuming it. So what's going to happen is people in other countries are going to get to buy what the Americans can no longer afford. See, they're not buying it right now because the Americans are outbidding them. So all this is going to change, and it's, you know, a big loss for the U.S. and a gain for the rest of the world. No, because other consumers are going to pick up that slack. Remember, it's just a transfer of consumption. Americans consume less, the Chinese consume more, right? Simple as that. Right? So net consumption isn't going down. It's just, where does the consumption take place? Who gets to do the consuming? Right? Because if Americans want to consume, they're going to have to pay much higher prices to do it. That's why Americans are going to consume so much less, because they're not going to have the money, right? They're not going to have the purchasing power to do it. I don't think anybody is really dumping dollars yet. I think they're slowly divesting. I don't think it's a rush for the exit yet. I think that's ultimately going to happen. And when that does happen, the dollar's exchange rate is going to be deteriorating at a far more rapid pace. I mean, so far the decline from the peak of around 115 to where we are now around 101, that's been very slow and steady and orderly. And I think that it will continue to be slow and steady, maybe until the dollar index gets around 80 or maybe 70. But once it cracks below that level, I expect the pace to really accelerate and potentially into an outright crash in the dollar. But the fact that so many in the media are now waking up to this and covering it, I mean, it really must be happening now that it's even being talked about. I mean, I've been talking about it for a long time, that it was inevitable, that it was an inevitability this would happen. But nobody really talked about it. They just thought that it was inevitable that the dollar would be the reserve currency indefinitely. Now you're finally starting to see some acknowledgement that that might not be the case, but I still don't think the mainstream really understands the significance of what this means and how life in America will change so profoundly if the dollar's, or when the dollar's reserve currency status is lost. Well, first, for consumers, the reason that our consumption-based economy works is because of the dollar status. You know, we're able to export dollars and import real goods. We have $1 trillion a year trade deficit, and we pay for all that merchandise just by printing money. So we don't have to expend any resources, yet we can import $1 trillion worth of goods that the rest of the world consumed considerable resources producing. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're not going to be able to run these trade deficits anymore. Our trade is going to have to be brought into balance. And that means basically, let's say $1 trillion worth of merchandise every year disappears from our shelves.